On Austin Faith Dialogue today, we're talking with a young woman from Kenya, a Christian, about her experiences here studying and working in Austin. Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
I'm glad you've joined us here today for Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, and our guest today is a young woman from the Methodist Church in Kenya, here living and studying in Austin, Nkirote Mary. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Now, it's unusual, some of us would think, for someone all the way from Kenya to come to Austin to study, since there are a lot of places one can go for theological study. How did you get from home to Austin?
I got from home to Austin through the Auspice of the World Council of Churches Conference, which gave me a scholarship for 1 year, and that's how I ended up being here.
Was it your choice to come to Austin, or did the World Council of Churches have a particular program in mind for you?
What the World Council of Churches does is when they give you a scholarship, they also get a school for you. So it was their choice, but I like it.
Well, we think you've made a good choice. So, Nkirote, you're at Austin Presbyterian Seminary, and what are you studying there then?
I'm doing more work on women's studies.
Why women's studies? Theology is a relatively broad field. What is it about women's studies that particularly appeals to you?
That's a good question, Sadie. The reason why I like studying women's studies is that I come from a culture whereby women are marginalized in the society. And when we look at African theology, feminist theology is lacking, and the voices of women are not heard. So my dream is to work with women, and that's why I'm studying feminist theology.
And the program at Austin Pres, then, is it one of the outstanding programs in women's studies?
Actually, it's not one of the outstanding programs. What I'm doing now is that I'm assigned to a professor, and I'm working with her.
So you're just beginning your career, it sounds like.
Right.
I'm curious about your statement just a minute ago about feminist theology is lacking.
Right.
If that's the case in Kenya, then how did you come to understand that theology was lacking? What was it for you that sort of opened your eyes?
It is because that many people have written theology made in Africa, and the issues of women are not there. So I feel that women's voices are not heard. And therefore, we need a theology that articulates the issues of women so that their voices can be heard in the community.
What would that look like, the voices of women in an African context, which I assume is different from a North American context?
Their voices is that, as I said earlier, women in Africa are very much marginalized by the society. A woman in Africa does almost everything. She many times becomes the breadwinner. She does a lot of work, yet it's not recognized by the society. Okay, the society holds them down, and they also hold themselves down. So it's more of a psychological problem because they've been taught that they cannot, or they do not have any input within the society.
And so a theology then that would speak to African women's experiences, what would it say to her?
It is giving African women some hope, and to encourage them and to jumpstart them and to let them know that they have something that they can offer to the society and to the church and to the community.
That sounds like a rather radical notion for some people in the church in Kenya, probably. How do you suppose, as women's voices get heard more and more, the church is going to react?
Well, the structures in the church now is changing. And I believe the church now is ready to listen to the voices of women because women are the majority right now, and women groups are the most active in our churches back in Kenya.
So you're suggesting it may be just a question of sheer numbers. At this point, there are so many women that the church in Kenya can't ignore them?
Right.
Now, your family, as I understand, hasn't been Christian for generation after generation.
Right.
What was it like growing up for you as a Christian in Kenya? What's your family history?
Well, I was born of Christian parents. Both my dad and my mom were Christians, but my grandmother was not. And when I used to be sick as a child, my grandmother would want me to be taken to a medicine man, but my mother wanted to take me to a mission hospital. So as I was growing, I was like, who is right? My parents or my grandmother? But later, she became a Christian, but she doesn't know how to read and write. So every morning, each one of us had a day assigned so that we could read the Bible for her. And I remember my day used to be on Wednesday, and I didn't like it because she used to come very early in the morning, wake us up, ask us, please wake up, read the Bible for me before the bands of the hair takes all the blessings. And I used to read, and after I am done, she would tell me, Kirote, what does the Bible say? And I'm like, Grandma, I thought you were listening. She says, no, I want you to tell me what the Bible says. So I could read all over again and trying to explain to her. And to me, that was kind of a journey. It was having personal contact with the scripture, and that's how my faith grew.
So as she was learning about Christianity, you were learning. How old were you at about this time?
About 8, 9.
I'm intrigued by the idea of an 8 or 9-year-old explaining the scriptures to her grandmother, a new Christian, very early in the morning. And then you mentioned a mission school, or mission hospital rather. What was your education? Was it influenced by the Methodist Church in Kenya?
Yeah, my education was very much influenced by the Methodist Church in Kenya because I went to a Methodist school, I went to a Methodist seminary, and it has really contributed towards my education and even encouraging me as a woman.
In what way do you think?
The Methodist Church in Kenya encourages women to study and to become pastors. It is through that process that they encouraged me and studied and then became a pastor.
Is that true in your experience of other Christian churches in Kenya? Do they encourage women to take leadership roles?
Most of the churches now are doing it because culture is not static. Things are changing, and therefore they are really encouraging women. They're trying to.
You've been in Austin about, a little over a year.
Yeah.
What was it like the first time you went back home after having been here? How had you changed, for instance?
I believe in not losing my identity as an African woman. So when I went back home, I don't think that I had many changes, except that I had learned some good things here. And those good things that I learned, I took them home and taught my church, taught my groups, and I don't think I'm a different person, or I was a different person.
What were some of those good things that you took back with you?
One of the good things that I took back with me is having prayer groups and cell groups, and also women meeting and praying together.
That's new for the Methodist Church in Kenya?
Not really new, but they were not that committed. So that's something new that I learned, that women can meet, pray together, and also women can have groups which can help people in need.
What will that help look like? Or are you talking about direct, say, feeding of children, or what kind of help in need?
In Kenya right now, we are having many street people around us, which is really a challenge. And the women have started giving the little that they have to these street people to make sure that they are fed and also to put up shelters for them.
Can you describe, because not everyone may know, some of the situation in Kenya these days, not just within the church, but within society? Are things relatively stable or in an upheaval? Is life expectancy growing or not? What is life like in Kenya?
In Kenya, things now are not very good. There has been an economic crisis, but I thank God that we've never had war. Therefore, there has been peace. But the gap between rich and poor is getting wider each day, and the number of street people is actually rising. I'm saying street people because there are people get married on the streets and get children there. That's why I'm no longer calling them street children. So, but still we have a hope. Hope is not lost.
And what's happening within the Methodist Church in Kenya these days to try to address, say, some of that income gap between rich and poor?
Actually, the Methodist Church in Kenya is very much involved in the whole process, even in the process of democratization, because we're in the process of changing our constitution, and it has been an agent of change within the society.
Is the church respected and listened to, or how is it received?
The church is very much respected, and their voices are heard.
So I assume then that maybe some of the key people in Kenyan government are graduates of mission schools and products of some of the churches?
Not necessarily, but the church has always been voicing their concerns, and at the end of the day, their voices are heard and things change.
The church then is not looked at just as an instrument of a group from outside of Kenya, in other words, as an export from the United States.
Not anymore, because right now we are trying to have a theology made in Africa, and therefore we are trying even to contextualize the gospel so that people cannot feel that it's foreign, so that it can be their gospel.
Tell me a little bit about what contextualization looks like then.
Contextualization is a process whereby people have their own things and where God speaks to people in their context.
For instance?
They do things, the worship, the kind of the worship that they do is African itself, because maybe the hymns that we had as mission churches is the hymns sing and we are just studying, but African music is characterized with a little bit of movement. That's what we are trying to do now. And also worshiping God in a way that expresses the African context.
So movement and liturgy and music, all of that reflects an African reality, not a North American reality. Okay. Well, we'll come back for some more conversation here in the second half, find out a little bit more about you, about your plans for the future and your program. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us for the first half of Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll be right back. We're glad you're still here with us in Austin Faith Dialogue. We're talking about women's studies today and a whole host of other things. And our guest is Kirote Mary, who's a member of the Methodist Church in Kenya, pastor of the Methodist Church in Kenya, and also a student here at Austin Presbyterian Seminary in Austin. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Now, you said in the first half of the show that you got to Austin Pres through a scholarship from the World Council of Churches. Well, that's an enormous organization, and yet you came to their attention. Tell me a little bit about how they noticed you and the work you're doing.
My first contact with the World Council of Churches conference is when my church appointed me to go and represent it at the conference in Brazil in 1996, where I presented a paper on mission concerns in Africa. However, I didn't know that they were to give me a scholarship. So I got their scholarship through the National Council of Churches of Kenya, and the WCC gives those scholarships on behalf of the council. So I got the scholarship through the National Council of Churches of Kenya.
And the scholarship then was to bring you to the United States
Right.
for what, a year of
For
study?
a year, but I did my Master of Arts in Theology.
You worked hard.
Well,
Now, you're already a pastor, so what kinds of experiences, pastoral ministry experiences, have you already had at home in Kenya?
well, I was a pastor and I was pastoring 5 congregations in the city, which was not easy. And they kept me on my toes. I mean, running up and down every other time, because as a pastor taking care of 5 congregations in a city is really difficult. And you have to visit people, you have to visit those who are sick in hospital, you have to visit schools. But I'm glad that I made it. What we do is that if you have 5 congregations, there are lay people who are trained on how to preach, and we give them preaching assignments because the pastor cannot preach in 5 churches at the same day. So we work through the help of lay people who do a lot of work in the Methodist Church in Kenya.
As they do in most churches. But why 5? Are there just not enough ordained people in Kenya, or were these small churches that you're working with?
3 of them were not small churches. The thing is, the pastors are not enough in Kenya, and not every congregation can be able to pay a pastor. So they have to combine churches so that they can be able to pay a pastor.
So there are circuit riders, as Methodist
Right.
folks call them,
Right.
even over in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about your pastoral work that then encouraged your interest in women's studies? What did you discover, say, that you were missing?
I worked among the Maasai people, and Maasai are one of the indigenous people that we have in Kenya. And as I interacted with them, I realized that they really marginalize women, because among the Maasai community, girls are forced to be married at a very early stage, and they do not have a right to choose who to marry them, when to get married, and therefore they drop from school and go to get married. And therefore, women really, in some of the African cultures, are really, really marginalized. And this kind of jump-started me to think of how I can help my fellow women overcome these things. I'm not saying that things may change overnight, but what we need to do is to educate both men and women, because if we educate women alone, then changes will never be there. But we need to educate also men alongside women.
You have a tremendous task. How do you think that your work will be received since you're coming through the church? I'm wondering, for instance, if people from tribal backgrounds who don't happen to be Christian might have some resistance to the work you'd be doing.
Well, resistance to any change is inevitable, but we have to move on. We shouldn't be discouraged by that. I know there will be resistance in the beginning of the whole thing, but I also believe that any change is gradual. With the time, things are going to change.
And you'll help make that happen. That's
Yeah.
Was it important for you to come to the United States, or would there have been possibilities for you to study in Africa? In other words, within the context of Africa and not taking you outside of Africa?
The problem is that right now we do not have universities which offer Master of Theology, especially on the field of feminist studies, and therefore I want to come all the way. It's a sacrifice, though.
Oh, yes, to be away from home and family. Now, when you go back, when you're eventually through with your studies,
Yeah.
what do you anticipate being able to do in Kenya?
One thing I'm happy for is that I am a pastor, and therefore I have a forum. In the church, that's where I'll start by teaching women so that I can kind of have a lovely group or trainers who can train other women. So that's my strategy.
To work through the lay people. So
Right.
you'll be in a local church as opposed to, say, being in a seminary and teaching in a seminary.
I might be teaching in the seminary, but our system is a little bit different in the Methodist Church in Kenya. When you are stationed to teach in a seminary, you are still stationed in a church as an associate pastor. So you are not detached completely from the church.
That actually sounds like a good model.
I like it.
I'm curious as to what has struck you the most about your time in Austin. What didn't you expect from being here and being in the seminary in Austin?
Well, that's a tough question, but one of the things is that when I came, I felt like I was in Babylon because it was my first time to be away from my family. But I really like the way the members of Austin Seminary welcome people, strangers, and they made me feel at home. So I'm glad to be there.
It's a
And
good
to me,
community.
that's striking, the way they welcomed a stranger and they made me feel at home.
It's a good community, even halfway across
It is a
the
very
world.
welcoming, friendly community.
And I think you've had opportunities to be in some local churches.
Right.
Have there been things that you've been surprised at in local churches?
I am a member of the University United Methodist Church here in Austin. And when I came, they really welcomed me. I've participated in some of the church programs. Very much at home. I feel that I belong. So it's very striking also.
What contribution do you think that you particularly are bringing to your local church?
One of the contributions that I'm bringing to my local church is a global church. Because I come from a different background and I have some things to offer, and I also have some things to learn from this local church. So what I see more is a global church.
So, for instance, how do you offer that global perspective?
They invite me to teach in the Sunday school, and I've been teaching about that and telling more about Kenya.
And what are you then learning from your local church?
One thing I'm learning is to be more involved in the community around and identifying myself with the marginalized, because that's what Jesus did. And to me, that's a good model.
Does that mean you're getting involved in community service or in volunteer service?
Yeah, because the University United Methodist Church has many programs which cater for the community around, and to me it's a big, big challenge.
So you have this forum here on television to speak to a lot of people. Some are Christian and some are not, some are Methodist and some are not. What would you want to say as a person coming from another country, a person of faith coming from another country?
What I would want to say is that I like what the community does, regardless of denomination, because what I see here is that denominations merge together to help the community. For example, there is things like Interfaith Care Alliance, the issue of street people. I see all the churches involved. There is that feeling of working together for the sake of the community. And I would like to encourage that, because regardless of our denominational affiliation, we need to do the work of God. We need to help the community around us. And that's what we are called for.
A good reminder to all of us. Is that common in Kenya? Do people work together across church lines and across faith lines?
Yeah, that's very well. I mean, like now we are going through the constitutional reform process, and the Christians, through the National Council of Churches of Kenya, the Muslims are working together to push the government so that they can review the constitution.
It sounds to me as if the church in Kenya, not just the Methodist church, but the church in general, has a lot more influence then on the political process than we do here in the United States. Would that be true?
Yeah, because I believe that you cannot divorce the church from state. And this reminds me of Luke 4, or 14, verse 18 and 9. 4, 18 and 19. That the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach the good news to the poor and to bring liberty to those who are slaves. And the church cannot sit at the fence when things are not right. And therefore, the church in Kenya has decided to be an agent of change. And that's why we can involve ourselves, not really in politics, but telling the government, look here, this is not right. If we do this, things are going to be better.
In this whole process then of speaking to and with the government, is there a particular role for women to play?
The role for women is very minimal because we do not have many women, if we have very few, in the political arena. But I believe very soon we'll have some because things are changing and we are encouraging women also to take leadership roles.
Well, as things are changing, let's speculate a little then.
Yeah.
Within a little while, you will be done with your program and probably back home in Kenya. What do you want your ministry to look like based on this experience here in the United States? Say 3 to 5 years down the road, what will your ministry look like?
My ministry would be, it's more itinerant, I think, because my vision is to go teaching people and kind of selling the ideas or appropriating the knowledge that I'm gaining here to help people, and especially my target is women. And I think my ministry will be better. I'll be a better pastor, a better woman pastor, and that's why I'm here.
So now if someone is particularly interested in helping you or in helping other students like you, what's a good way to do that?
I think the best way is through education. I mean, all that we need is education so that we can be able to work and to help bring change. Yeah, that's the best way.
So we might encourage, in other words, people here in the United States to continue to do things like provide scholarship money and welcome international students into their congregations. And what else?
And also encouraging women in the United States also to go and work with women in Africa.
What will happen when that happens?
Well, there's nothing. I mean, they'll just teach them and sensitize them.
To bring about greater change in society and in the family?
Yeah, and also it will bring kind of connectedness of the global church and working together to build a new relationship also.
To really become one body of Christ, like our
Right.
scriptures call us to. Well, there's so much more we might talk about, and certainly we can talk further as your education progresses. Kirote, thank you for the conversation, for the glimpse of life in the church in Kenya. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us this week on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll look forward to seeing you here again next week.